Within this screencast, we'll be looking at Devcloud4. Devcloud4 allows you to bring up a cloudstack environment using Vagrant, Chef, and VirtualBox on your own machine. The project is located at github.com/inw15/devcloud4. If we clone the project, you should be able to see the following directory structure. For the sake of this screencast, I'm going to be focusing on the binary installation basic version. What this will do is it will give me two boxes. One will be operating on 192.168.22.5. It will provide MySQL, NFS, and the cloudstack management server. The other box will be running on 192.168.22.10. It will be the hypervisor box, and that is using Zen Server 6.2. I'm going to go ahead and kick off the process by running vagrant up. This takes some time, so we will revisit it later. But while it is running, we'll look at some of the things that goes on in the background. Okay, so these are the files within the basic binary installation folder. We can see our vagrant file here. The first important section of our vagrant file is the description of the Zen server box. There's not a lot to it. It has 6 gigs of RAM and it has a host-only adapter. It's configured with the IP address 192.168.22.10, and that's all there is. The management server box, on the other hand, is much more interesting. This is the box where we'll be running NFS, MySQL, and the cloudstack manager. We give it the IP address 192.168.22.5. We port forward port 3306 to our host machine. This is MySQL. So if we want to access the cloudstack MySQL database using some MySQL client on our host machine, we can easily do so by going to localhost on 3306. We also port forward 8080, so we can access the cloudstack at MinUI through localhost 8080 for such client in our browser. Again, we give it a host-only interface for communication between our host and the hypervisor machine. And then we do the provisioning task using Chef. So let's take a look at how that works. We have this Chef configuration.json file which sets out a run list and a bunch of Chef attributes. Our run list is quite small. There's two cookbooks, cloudstack vagrant environment, which is a wrapper cookbook around the CloudOps cloudstack cookbook. This will be responsible for installing and configuring cloudstack. We'll have a look at how it does that in a moment. And the other recipe is NatRouter. I want to be able to give the VMs that users bring up internet access out, so I configure the management server box to access as a gateway for them. Again, we'll have a look at this in more detail later. So the basic configuration for cloudstack is fairly straightforward. We set out some database credentials and we set out a prefilled.sql file. We'll have a look what this SQL file does in a moment, and we'll go through some of the options and why they're being set. We configure our NFS storage for both secondary and primary. We give it a URL to download the system VM from. In this case, we will be installing cloudstack 4.3.1 when we get the appropriate system VM. We give it a location of yum and app repos where it can download the cloudstack binaries. And finally, we give it a Marvin configuration file. Marvin is a utility that is used for automatically configuring cloudstack. We'll look at this configuration file in a moment and go through what exactly it does. So let's take a look at this prefilled.sql file. So when we install cloudstack by default, we're given a few different service offerings, all of which use shared storage. That is storage that is not connected directly to the hypervisors. For the sake of running Devcloud, shared storage is a bit of an overhead for us, so we use local storage. These first few SQL statements here create a new disk offering or new service offering which use local storage. This allows us to just quickly bring up virtual machines. These next few configuration items limit the RAM and CPU for all console VMs to 256. These are much higher by default, but for running a fully virtualized environment, we kind of want to keep these down so we can bring up some users or VMs. We set the option to use local storage on system VMs to be true. This means that the system VMs can come up on local storage as opposed to shared storage. We set some different values for the expunge so it happens faster. We set the management network to be 0.0.0.0.0/0, which is anything, and we do the same for secondary storage. Internal sites allowed. We update the configuration. We update the table for the VM templates, and we tell it to download Ubuntu 12.04. So this means from our cloud boots, we should have a Ubuntu template downloaded and ready to go. Again, we'll have a look at this later, and we'll actually bring up a Ubuntu instance based off this template. Finally, we have our Marvin configuration file. This configures our whole cloudstack cloud. It sets out the zones, pods, the guest networks, all our hypervisors, and how all this comes together. So we'll go through this briefly. You see we create a new zone named Devcloud Basic 01. We give it a DNS, so it's just Google Public DNS. We enable local storage and security groups. We set that it's going to be of basic networking type for cloudstack. We configure a pod. We give it the IP addresses 22.200 to 22.220 for system VM, so any of our console proxies, secondary storage, routers, so on and so forth will come up in those ranges. We then define a guest network from 22.100 to 22.199. This will be used for any VMs that a user brings up. We configure a cluster of a single Xen server hypervisor that operates in 22.10. And then finally we tell it where secondary storage is. So that's all there is to that. So let's take a look at how our vagrant up is doing. Okay, so you can see it's ran and it's brought up our Xen server box without issue. If I come over to VirtualBox, I can confirm that there I have Xen server running. If we scroll down, I can see that it started to provision the CentOS box and install all required utilities for installing and configuring cloudstack. Let's have a look at what it's got to. Okay, so we see our chef run happening here. It installs and configures NFS. It installs and configures MySQL. And installs and configures the Yum repository for downloading cloudstack. It goes ahead and it installs Python 2.7 and Python pip, which is required for installing cloudstack Marvin. And then it goes ahead and installs cloudstack from RPMs. So we'll just leave this to run for a moment and we will come back to it when it's finished. Okay, Chef has finished configuring our management server box and Vagrant Up has ended successfully. Let's have a look at what happened since we paused. So when we left off, we were installing cloudstack from cloudstack repos. And since then we set up some security limits just to allow cloudstack to open more files at once, so on and so forth. We downloaded the system template for Xen server and we installed that into cloudstack. We restarted the cloudstack management server and waited for it to come up. We then configured it using Marvin and the configuration file that we viewed earlier. And finally we configured the box to act as a router. So, if all this went well, I should be able to go over to my browser. I should be able to browse to localhost 8080/client and get the cloudstack UI. This usually takes a few moments to load due to the sheer size of the cloudstack UI. So just give it a minute and don't get worried. it would take slightly longer than you would expect. We can go ahead and log in as admin with the default password. We should be greeted with our cloudstack dashboard. If we come over to infrastructure, we will see our zone has been created with its pod, with its cluster, with its one host added, and we will see that we have two system VMs running, our console proxy and our secondary storage. We'll just leave this for a moment and let them boot up. Okay, great. So both of our system VMs successfully booted. They're in a running state and the agent is up. This is really good. It means our cloud is successfully able to boot virtual machines. And if we go to the template section, we see this Ubuntu 14.04 template that was defined in the pre-seed file. If we click into that, we should see that the template is downloading, which is awesome. When this finishes and installed, we will be able to bring up a virtual machine based off the template, and we'll be able to see Ubuntu running. So let's pause for a moment and we can come back to this. Okay, so we can see that the template has finished downloading and installing, and it is now in the ready state. This means we can go ahead and create a virtual machine based off this template. So let's head over to instances. Let's add a new instance. We're going to put it into the Devcloud basic 01 zone. We're going to use a template. We're going to use the Ubuntu 14.04 template. We're going to use the Devcloud4 offering. We're not going to use a disk offering. We don't need that either. We're just going to put in the default security group. And we will call the Devcloud demo. Okay. We'll hit launch VM. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to copy the template from secondary storage over into primary storage, just on the hypervisor. We'll create a virtual machine based off that template and we'll bring it up. This stage takes a little bit of time, so we will come back when the virtual machine is fully booted. Okay, we can see our instance has successfully booted. We can config quick view menu. We can view console, and we can see our terminal window with the virtual machine booting. We can go ahead and log in with root and password, which is awesome. Right in google.com, we add introductions on VM. So one last final thing, let's open up SSH access to this VM. So if we come over to network, go to security groups, go to default security group, we got a new ingress rule for 22.22 on any IP range. Go ahead and add. Come back over here. I can take the IP address off my machine. And from my host, I can simply SSH into the box with root IP address, yes, and password. And there we go. That's a full cloudstack installation and Ubuntu virtual machine coming up. All with automated configuration thanks to Vagrant and Chef. I hope you find this useful and have a great day. Thanks.